You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and if you hear any buzzing during this show, they're doing construction outside my house. I don't know why they picked now to do it during a pandemic, but whatever. It is essential work. God bless the people doing it. So there's really nothing I can do. I can't pull the plug on the machine, so we're just gonna have to power through it. I gotta start with the Raiders signing Prince Amukamara. And this is a really, really good move for them. Amukamara, ever since he's been in the NFL, has been a solid corner. He's never had a Pro Football Focus grade worse than 60.6, and that was in his rookie year, 2011 with the Giants, when he played less than 200 snaps. Every year he got better. I know there were some Giants fans that were upset that he never took that leap from good to great, and that's fine. You know, Amukamara was a first rounder. You want those guys to be great. But there's nothing wrong with good. Alright, good is better than a bust. And if you take a guy 19th overall, and you don't trade up for him, and you just have a solid player on your roster for 10 or 15 years, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Obviously, Amukamara didn't last 10 or 15 years with the Giants. He left in 2016 to go to the Jaguars, and has spent the last few years with the Bears. He's kept his good play up. He makes a ton of sense for the Raiders, a team that really needed cornerback help. You take a look at their corners: Damon Arnett, Trayvon Mullen, LaMarcus Joyner, Amik Robertson, and Nevin Lawson. It's not a terrible cornerback group, but it's not great. And the addition of Amukamara makes that group a lot better. Very similar to what Logan Ryan is going to do for the Jets, assuming that contract gets finalized. I saw some people on Jets Twitter upset that the Raiders got Amukamara. They wanted Amukamara over Ryan. Ryan is better than Amukamara. They're both good corners. There's not a huge gap between them, but I'll take Ryan over Amukamara. Don't worry about that. Regardless, great move by the Raiders. We don't know what the contract is going to be, but it's not going to be exorbitant, I can promise you that. Very smart move to bring him in, and he'll also help mentor their young corners. They get a 2-for-1 deal there. A good player and a teacher. Alright, now it's time to recap the Cleveland Browns draft. The Browns, I thought, had a great draft. Jedrick Wills was viewed by some as the best pure tackle in this draft. I personally had him as the third best tackle in this draft, but I understand why a lot of people loved Wills. fantastic run blocker, really tough player. He jumped off the tape at Alabama. He'll help solidify a very shaky Browns offensive line. I mean, last year that O-line was dreadful. But now that O-line of Wills, Bitonio, Treader, Teller, and Conklin, while Wyatt Teller can be improved, that Browns O-line is a hell of a lot better than it was 12 months ago. Great job by Paul DePodesta, Andrew Berry, and Kevin Stefanski. Whoever made the final decision to draft him, I have no idea how that power structure works. The Browns also needed a safety. Not a lot of people were talking about that. Andrew Sendejo is good, but he's not great, and he's only played a little over 750 snaps in the past 2 seasons. You can't trust that guy to play next to Carl Joseph for 16 games. Somehow, and I don't know how this happened, but somehow, Grant Delpit slipped into the second round. This is a guy who I thought was the 26th best prospect in this draft. I don't know how him and Xavier McKinney and Antoine Winfield Jr. slipped into the second round, but the safety-needy teams in this league really hit a home run when they took him. When you look at Delpit, he checks all the boxes that you want a safety prospect to check. Excellent ball skills, really smart, good cover guy, good tackler. The thing that knocked him down some boards was his frame and his injury. He had a high ankle sprain in the second half of last season. That scared some teams off. He's also 6'2", 213 pounds. Not a great frame, but Delpit makes it work. You watch him play, he just does things that really make you take notice. I thought the Browns hit a home run with that pick. And they also hit a home run with Jordan Elliott. Jordan Elliott, I had as the 50th best prospect in this draft. ESPN was even higher on him. They had him as the 41st best prospect. Jack of all trades, master of none. The thing that people really didn't like about him was his production at Missouri was really bad. Only 2.5 sacks and 44 tackles. He's also just a shade over 300 pounds. You'd like him to add some muscle. I get that. And that's going to be tough for him to do in this current climate. But this kid has all the potential in the world. If he adds even just 10 or 15 pounds of muscle, the Browns have a really, really scary defensive tackle to push Sheldon Richardson. I thought that was a great pick. I also thought the Jacob Phillips pick was a great pick. No, I'm not saying that just because he shares a name with me. Phillips filled a huge need for the Browns at linebacker. Some people didn't like that pick because they had a mid to late 4th round grade on him. I had an early 4th round grade on him. The Browns took him late in the 3rd round in the compensatory part of that round. That's not an egregious reach. I can forgive that. Phillips is a jack of all trades, master of none. The thing is, in one-on-one situations, he has a tendency to get bowled over. He's only 230 pounds. And it's going to be difficult for him to put on the amount of muscle needed to go after these NFL players one-on-one. Obviously, he's able to do it at college because those guys are weaker. He had 97 tackles last year for LSU. He's not going to have that many in the NFL. But he's a really smart player. He's good in coverage. You can play him all 3 downs. I think he'll contribute on special teams. I really like the Jacob Phillips pick. And the Browns did need another linebacker to play alongside Sione Takitaki and Mack Wilson. 2 other young linebackers. If those 3 guys pan out, the Browns have a scary defense on their hands. You've got to like the direction that they're going. This new brain trust actually seems to have a solid head on their shoulders, believe it or not. I know that Mack Wilson didn't have a good year last year, but Takitaki did. And you get the sense that Wilson can put something together. He does have potential. I remember liking him in last year's draft. Thought he should have gone higher than the 5th round. If he doesn't pan out, that's something that can be fixed. That's not the end of the world if you have 2 good linebackers with Phillips and Takitaki and a bad one in Mack Wilson. That's something that can be fixed and overcome. Don't worry about that. A lot of people liked the Harrison Bryant pick. And look, I understand why. ESPN had him as the 77th best prospect in this draft. I had a 3rd round grade on him too. His production at FAU was off the charts. 65 catches for over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. But the Browns just signed Austin Hooper. They already have David Njoku. Why are they picking Bryant? They like Njoku. I know they do. They exercised his 5th-year option. Now you've added another tight end to that mix? That's really confusing. Look, I understand that the Browns address their other needs. So, you have the luxury of taking the best player available. I understand that, and I like Bryant. Bryant's going to be a good player in the NFL. Even though he has a bad frame, 6'4", 243 pounds, I mean, he's got to add a ton of muscle, and he's a terrible blocker, he'll do well enough as a receiving tight end that he'll have a long career. But best player available should mean best player available that fits your roster. You picked a guy in the 4th round who's going to have a really tough time getting reps. I wasn't crazy about that pick. Nick Harris has a ton of potential. He's a guy who can only play center. He cannot play guard, he cannot play tackle. He has to play center. And J.C. Treader isn't getting any younger. I don't mind the idea of the Browns drafting a guy who can push him, seeing as though he's going to be 30 years old in February. I like his hands. I like his athleticism. He's worth the 5th round pick. You want to tell me that he's not a physical specimen and he doesn't have good footwork? That's perfectly fine. But a 5th round pick that can potentially take over for a soon-to-be 30-year-old center, I'll take that. That makes perfect sense to me. I also saw some Browns fans saying that he could slide over to right guard. and take over for Teller. That's not going to happen. Harris can only play center. Donovan Peoples-Jones, if you'll remember, was one of my sleeper guys in this draft. ESPN had him as the 126th best prospect in this draft. I was in that 5th round range too. He had a bad year last year at Michigan, but Shea Patterson caused all his wide receivers to have bad years. He was terrible. Peoples-Jones has a lot of potential, good separation skills, good ball skills, good hands, decent big playability. He can stretch the field, and he's a competitive player. He has a good frame, smart player. It's possible that he could also contribute on special teams. That made a ton of sense to add Peoples-Jones to a wide receiver core that already has Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. All in all, I love what the Browns did. They really only made one bad pick to me, and that was Harrison Bryant in the 4th round. Instead of giving them an A+, I'm going to give them an A. Alright, it's time for this day in sports history. On this day, in 1976, my beloved Nets won the last ever ABA championship. They beat the Denver Nuggets in 6 games. Before I get into the series, please indulge me. I'd love to talk about the 75-76 Nets. Coached by Kevin Lowry, one of the most underrated coaches in basketball history, won 2 ABA titles, both with the Nets. Obviously, they had Julius Erving. And Erving that year was incredibly dominant. That was arguably his best season. Put up 29 points a game, 11 rebounds, 5 assists, 2.5 steals, 2 blocks, played in 84 games. He was incredibly dominant. And that seems like an understatement. 99% of games, he was by far and away the best player on the court. The Nets also had Brian Taylor. To put Taylor into modern parlance, he's a better Patrick Beverley. Taylor could score like Beverley can't, but they were both tremendous defensive point guards. Taylor averaged 2.3 steals that year, put up 16.7 points. One of the most underrated players on those old Nets teams. And part of that is because his backcourt mate was Super John Williamson, a really, really good scorer, probably the second best scorer on that team behind Dr. J. Williamson could have had a great professional career. Unfortunately, his career was hampered by injuries. He had troubles with his weight. He actually died very young. He died at the age of 45 from kidney failure. He had diabetes. He was not a healthy man. He had a lot of issues in his career that prevented him from being great, and he could have been great. The Nets also had some solid players who you don't need to know about, but you should. I'll go through them fast. Rich Jones, Al Skinner, Kim Hughes, good rebounder, double-double threat every night. Tim Bassett, coming off the bench, filled that Hughes role. The thing about the Nets is they were constructed really well. You know how when a player gets hurt, his backup has to move into the starting spot and he plays a completely different game from the starter, so the entire team gets thrown out of whack? The Nets didn't do that. The Nets had 3 centers in Hughes, Bassett, and Swen Nader, who they traded mid-season, who played a similar game. Good defensively, great rebounders, could be counted on to score if they needed to in the low post. A very well-constructed team was the 75-76 Nets. The Nets got past the San Antonio Spurs in 7 games to make it to the ABA Finals. That Spurs series was a harbinger of things to come. Games 1 and 2 were blowouts, but after that, the highest margin of victory for any team was 8 points. That was in Game 3. Unfortunately, we don't have complete stats for those series. We do know that Julius Erving and John Williamson dominated. Brian Taylor, Rich Jones, and Al Skinner contributed also. For the Spurs, George Gervin was incredible, obviously. So was Larry Keenan. Billy Pultz, former Net, was good. Mike Gale was good. There's a name out of the past for you. Mike Gale. Former Net, actually. I wish I could give you more about that series, but unfortunately the ABA didn't keep good stats. The Nets went on to face the Nuggets, obviously. The Nuggets that year were the best team in the ABA. They finished with 60 wins. Larry Brown was their coach. And they had one of the best starting fives in professional basketball history. At point guard, they had Chuck Williams. He was the weak link, but he was a good player. Averaged 11 points that year, a little under 3 rebounds a game, and a little under 5 assists per game. Very good defensively, though. Averaged 1.5 steals that year. At shooting guard, one of the most underrated players in ABA history, Ralph Simpson, made 5 All-Star teams in the ABA, 3-time All-ABA player. That year, he put up 18 points a game, along with 5.5 rebounds, 7 assists, and just under 2 steals a game. Incredibly underrated. Small forward, their best player, David Thompson. You don't need me to tell you how great David Thompson was. Hall of Famer. That was his only year in the ABA. He obviously followed the Nuggets into the NBA, where he continued his dominance. Thompson, in his one ABA year, averaged 26 points a game, 6.3 rebounds, 3.7 assists, 1.5 steals per game, and 1.2 blocks per game. Incredibly dominant. Power forward, they had Bobby Jones, future Philadelphia 76er. Jones would later go on to play with Julius Erving and win an NBA championship in '83, but he got his start with the Nuggets in the ABA and was incredibly dominant. His 2 years in the ABA, he led the league in field goal percentage. Averaged 15 points a game, 8 to 9 rebounds, 3.5 to 4 assists. Great defensively, could get steals, could get blocks. Bobby Jones is one of the most underrated players in ABA history. And at center, they had Dan Issel, one of the best centers in ABA history. 23 points a game, 11 rebounds, 2.5 assists. He was otherworldly. And obviously he continued that dominance when he went to the NBA, made the Hall of Fame, one of the most underrated players in professional basketball history. The Nuggets in the first round faced the Kentucky Colonels, a battle of two great centers, Issel and Artis Gilmore. Also, two great coaches, Larry Brown versus Hubie Brown. The series was closer than it should have been, but the Nuggets were able to blow the Colonels out in Game 7. They won by 23 points. And obviously, they faced the Nets in the ABA Finals. That series is one of the most underrated in professional basketball history. The largest margin of victory for any team was 9 points. And that was in Game 4. Fortunately, the ABA did keep better stats for its championship round, so I can go a little more in depth there. Julius Erving dominated that game as the high man with 45 points, hit all 11 of his free throws, had 12 rebounds, and led the Nets to a narrow 2-point victory. What you need to know about that game from a Nuggets perspective is that Marvin Webster had a great game. Double-double off the bench. Former Knick, Marvin Webster. There's a name out of the past for you. Game 2, the Nuggets come back despite a better game from Dr. J, where he put up 48 points and 14 rebounds. The Nuggets had a great, well-rounded attack. They had 4 players score at least 24 points. Simpson, Thompson, Jones, and Issel. And that tied the series up at 1. Game 3 moves to the Nassau Coliseum. Finally, Dr. J gets some help. He had a great game, but so did Rich Jones. 22 points, 10 rebounds. Super John put up 28 points. And Kim Hughes put up 14 points and 11 rebounds. Tim Bassett also had 12 rebounds. Rich Jones, very underrated ABA player. I shouldn't have skipped over him like I did. He had a very good ABA career. Just couldn't carry it over to the NBA for whatever reason. The Nuggets had a well-rounded offense that game with Thompson, Issel, and Simpson, but the Nets were just a little bit better, and they were able to win by 6. Game 4, the Nets blow the Nuggets out. They win by 9. 121 to 112. Very well-rounded game. Kim Hughes gets hurt. Only plays 9 minutes. Tim Bassett plays 36 minutes off the bench in that game and contributes 6 points, 8 rebounds. Dan Issel got his 26 points and 15 rebounds. But Bassett did enough that guys like Dr. J, Super John, and Brian Taylor were able to carry the load for the Nets. And Jim Eakins, coming off the bench, integral part of that win. That may have been the best game of his career. 17 points, 7 rebounds. The Nuggets had a well-rounded attack in that game. All their starters had at least 12 points, but it wasn't enough. Game 5, back in Denver. The Nuggets, with a well-rounded attack, are able to beat the Nets despite Dr. J putting up 37 points and 15 rebounds. Every one of the Nuggets starters put up at least 17 points. And they had 2 guys, Issel and Jones, put up double-doubles. Gus Gerard off the bench nearly had a double-double too. 12 points, 8 rebounds. Very well-rounded attack. That's what you loved about that Nuggets team. Very fun team to watch. Game 6, back at the Coliseum. Even though the Nuggets had the high man when it came to points, David Thompson with 42, and Dan Issel had 20 rebounds, high man there, the Nets were still able to win. Ralph Simpson had an off night, only went 1 for 9. The Nets had a well-rounded attack. Dr. J, 31 and 19 with 5 assists, 5 steals, and 4 blocks. One of the best games of his career. Brian Taylor, 24 points. Super John, 28 points. Jim Eakins, 15 points and 13 rebounds. Even though Rich Jones only shot 1 for 12 from the field, the Nets were able to win. Another thing that you need to know about that game is how they won. The Nets were down by 14 headed into the fourth quarter. The Nuggets scored 14 points in the fourth quarter. The Nets had 34 points in the fourth quarter and were able to win by 6. A great series featuring 2 great logos. I'm looking at them now. I really like that swoosh with the Nets and the NY over it, along with the ABA basketball, but the Nuggets have the much better logo. We need to go back to that logo. That is awesome. Looks like a cartoon miner. That's incredible. The Nuggets had every opportunity to win that series, but the Nets were just a little bit better. And sometimes that's all it takes. Alright, it's time for another Mount Rushmore. If you're keeping score, you know that I'm on the San Francisco Giants. Very apropos. Yesterday, I published the John Shea interview about his book that he did with Willie Mays, and now I'm doing the Giants Mount Rushmore. Sometimes things just work out. There are a lot of different directions you can go with this. Orlando Cepeda, Juan Marichal, Carl Hubble, Madison Bumgarner, Bill Terry, Willie McCovey, Will Clark. And those are the guys who I left out. Those guys would be the top guys on the list of most other MLB teams. As bad a history as the Giants have had, they only won 5 World Series in the 20th century. They've had some fantastic players. The correct Mount Rushmore is Willie Mays, Christy Mathewson, Barry Bonds, and Mel Ott. Mays, you don't need me to tell you about. If you missed it yesterday, the John Shea interview got posted. You can learn more about Mays there. Christy Mathewson is one of the best postseason pitchers in baseball history. In 1905, against the Philadelphia Athletics, Mathewson started 3 games, pitched 27 innings, so 3 complete games, and didn't give up a single run. No runs earned, no runs allowed. He only walked 1. He was incredible. And despite similarly great series in 1911, 1912, and 1913, the Giants couldn't help him out. They lost all those series. In the regular season, Mathewson was just as dominant. 372 wins for the Giants, 373 total. He won 1 game for the 1916 Cincinnati Reds. 2,504 strikeouts for the Giants. in that one game with the Reds, he had 3 strikeouts. You really gotta wonder how he was traded for Amos Ruzzi. Look, all due respect to Ruzzi, he was a great pitcher in the old National League before the American League became a thing. But when the American League became a thing in 1901, that was it. Ruzzi only pitched in 3 games. One of the most lopsided trades in sports history. Barry Bonds, you don't need me to tell you how great he was. Fantastic 5-tool player, 586 home runs for the Giants, 73 home runs in a season. That's obviously the record. It's a shame they never won a World Series. It's interesting to think about, is he the best player never to win a World Series? It's either him or Ted Williams. It's tough. Really, really tough. Mel Ott, 511 home runs for the Giants, 2,876 hits for him. He spent his whole career with the Giants, 12-time All-Star for him, helped them win the 1933 World Series against the Washington Senators. He was fantastic in that series. He hit .389 with 2 home runs and 4 RBIs. Also has a lot of bold type. When he retired, he was 3rd on the all-time home run leaderboard. He retired in 1947. Should have retired a couple years sooner, but whatever. Tomorrow, probably more of the same. An NFL story or 2, plus the trifecta. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that I have to get up at 7 a.m.? I'm not even done throwing up at that hour.